those in a few minutes. The fourth level this is the level that of independent relationships. It's the level of psychoneurosis. It's the level that we speak of when we talk about people being well-developed, intact personalities, and yet what we're aware of now is if there ever were neurotics in pure culture, they're not on the planet now. Okay? So that we're aware that neurosis is a developmental achievement. That is, by the time a well-developed child has reached 5 years of age, that there is a certain kind of organization of personality that's possible, but that doesn't eradicate all of the other difficulties that have happened before that. Okay? The developmental metaphor then is the Oedipal period, and what really characterizes this, and really back in 1897 when Freud in his letters first began to talk about the Oedipus triangle, and he talked about it in relationship to Shakespeare's Hamlet, realizing that Shakespeare unconsciously knew about the dilemmas of Oedipus. And what are the dilemmas of Oedipus? Simply that because he was sent away from home at birth, that is rejected early on, that later his both lust and rage began to be directed at both of his parents. And so every person on the planet has had that particular kind of experience, and when we go into the Electra myth, we find that the same sort of unfortunate experience happens to girls, only girls tend to manage it differently. Rather than acting out rage and aggression in war, in wild sexuality, girls tend to develop, as Electra did, frigidity inside, strong inhibitions, and an angry, blaming attitude towards mother, and an impotent attitude towards father. So I think that while Freud originally did not want to use the Electra myth as the counterpart to the Oedipus myth, it was because Freud at that point in time wanted to think of the Oedipus myth as normal. And in time we began to realize there's nothing normal about it. It's just that we realize that all of our sexuality undergoes certain inhibitions at age 5 and 6. And for little boys, the inhibition is such that it gets repressed and then acted out. And for the little girl, more often than not, it tends to get repressed and held in her body in a way that stymies and stifles her. So that these two different myths portray ways in which men and women both experience their sexuality being limited by the problem of triangle relationships. So it's really at this age 5 that a child is able to realize that three-way relationships are very powerful, and the child begins to realize that competition in three-way relationships is very hurtful. I think I want to move on then to the transference, is the experience of the competitive relationship in other relationships, and the countertransference we're going to be looking at, Freud felt was overstimulating. That is, the therapist felt it often in erotic ways or aggressive ways, but that the countertransference was not going to be usable. That is, that we may feel overstimulated in a variety of ways to higher level psychological constellations, but the client, him or herself, is going to be able to tell us about it. Whereas at the earlier developmental levels, the emotional experiences that are salient, the client will not be able to tell us about, and so our countertransference is going to be more important to us. The case of Anna O, and I think we'll take a break right after this, but we've got just a brief thing. Bertha Pappenheim was treated by Joseph Breuer and Freud, and so we're going to go to a little video clip here and tell you about Anna O.
More than 100 years has passed since Bertha Pappenheim invented psychoanalysis. It was she who coined the phrase, the talking cure. Bertha was Dr. Joseph Breuer's, as most of you know. Her analysis lasted 18 months with Freud, when she was later transferred in over 100 years ago, in 1881 and 1882. I always like to tell a story about Bertha because she was a social worker. She later became a celebrated personage My favorite story is during the Nazi regime. She was running a home for wayward youth, for juvenile delinquents. And at one point, the Gestapo come in with their big black boots and they come banging in and they have this little kid by the ears, you know, and it's, do you know what he's been doing? All over the fences, he's writing, "Fuck the Fuhrer." So she was a tiny little woman, a Jewish lady, and she put her hands on her hips and she told him to get out, that this was a home for disturbed children and they would see that it didn't happen again, and they left. She was recently commemorated on a postage stamp. She was what's been called the specimen case of psychoanalysis. The case in the literature is known as Anna O. When she started by anybody's standards, we would think her pretty much a basket case. We could use all of our borderline symptoms. You know, there were eating problems and there were addiction problems and there was this, that, and the other. So we'd see her as sort of, what, a mixed bag? Borderline, moderate to severe? What would we say? What would the politics of our field want us to do? So Bertha began with Dr. Joseph Breuer, and for long periods of time, he was required to come and see her every day. And then when she'd moved to the country, to her country home in the summers, he'd have to take long train rides out to see her. At times during her analysis, she wouldn't even eat. So he was literally feeding her chicken soup with a spoon. Any of you ever done that? Because she wouldn't eat otherwise. She began first talking about her treatment with Dr. Breuer as waiting all day long until the end of the day when the doctor would come and penetrate her fleecy clouds with his wisdom, with his words. It was like, she said after he left, the chimney sweep had been there. Now, we would miss the sexual metaphors today, and I don't think Dr. Breuer did, nor would we miss today, as I don't think he did, that the onset of Bertha's difficulties were at the point that she began to nurse